welcome you to the Southface Sessions Leadership Speaker Series. And I have the very, very honored privilege today of introducing a very good friend, Nathaniel Smith, who is the leader, founder of Partnership for Southern Equity, and a person of great accomplishment. The first thing that I will say is something that I've learned from Nathaniel, and that change happens at the speed of trust. So I'll say it again, change happens at the speed of trust. And then furthermore, relationships are built on the speed of trust, and social change happens at the speed of relationships. So as we build partnerships with really fine partners like Nathaniel and his team of 60 staffers, it's really important. So under his leadership, they've had real accomplishment and real outcomes and results around expanding MARTA for the first time in 45 years. Through the COVID relief, they distributed more than $500,000 to 30 organizations that were in need, and working with the Atlanta Community Foundation of Greater Atlanta, United Way. His work around the Justice 40 Accelerator and entrepreneurship is profound and something that we really believe in making the whole ecosystem work. His awards are numerous, recognition by Atlanta Magazine, Georgia Trend Magazine, 100 Most Influential Georgians. I got to know him on a personal level as his co-chair of the Georgia Drawdown Leadership Council. So I've had the chance to serve with him for the last 3 years and watch his leadership in action. He was also honored by the Georgia House of Representatives for his work. But without further ado, our special guest and my friend, Nathaniel Smith.
Thank you, my friend. Thank you. So, I mean, it's really awesome to be here, to spend time with you all. You know, I can't help but think about the many, many meetings I participated in this room around various issues. You know, this is really a great place. And I'll tell you, if these walls could talk, they would have great stories of people working together to think of ways that we can realize a more sustainable and resilient future from all backgrounds and interests. Sometimes those conversations were pleasant. Sometimes those conversations were contentious. But I feel as if, you know, it takes different types of meat to make good sausage, right? And sometimes in the same way to make good policy, it takes various perspectives, right, and voices to ensure that all people are thought about when public decisions are made, particularly in the climate remediation space. One of the things that I would also like to say is that while, you know, you are listening to me communicate my thoughts, and hopefully it'll reinforce or either challenge some of your perceptions about how this work must go in order for us to realize a more sustainable future. I always take the time to honor the people who don't have an opportunity to have these conversations. People who are working every day to make ends meet. The people that we serve at the Partnership for Southern Equity, and even more so the people that have come before us, who've worked hard and sacrificed sometimes their lives for us to have an opportunity to move towards a more just and inclusive society. And so for me, it's very important for me to acknowledge these people, because without them, we would not be here. So for me, I think one of the key things that's really important about the work of the Partnership for Southern Equity, working to advance a racial equity agenda and a Black liberation agenda in Georgia and in the South and beyond, in particular within the climate justice and energy equity space. We believe as an organization that we will never realize true sustainability without realizing a just society. That we will not be able to do the many things that we want to do on the policy front until we're able to fully embrace and understand how we got here. We will never truly realize a sustainable or resilient society until we're also willing to advance a healing and repair agenda. If we're going to focus on sustainability, we have to focus on healing communities. If we're going to focus on resilience, we have to focus on repair. And the only way that we do that is if we acknowledge the history and the decisions that were made before we got here that have helped to facilitate many of the challenges that we're facing today. We cannot talk about a clean energy future without also talking about a just energy future. And if we're going to talk about a just energy future, we have to be honest about our energy history. We have to remember that before we were able to use fossil fuels in the South and other places around the country and world to drive an economy that has now become an economy built on extreme extraction, it was not electricity that drove this economy. It was the labor of slavery. The labor of slavery was the initial piston that helped to drive the creation and expansion of America and Western society. So if we're not willing to understand the utilization of bodies, in particular Black bodies and indigenous people's bodies, the utilization of stolen labor and stolen land as a way to grow and drive this economy, then we cannot truly be serious about realizing a sustainable society. Because we have to own how we got here. And we have to begin the process of making sure that we're able to bring those people along the same way that we're focusing on decarbonization, the same way that we're focusing on the technologies that will make us a healthier society. We have to have a level of moral health as well if we're serious about moving forward towards a more sustainable and resilient society. You know, we cannot move forward unless we truly, truly understand that there are communities right now where mothers have to choose between buying groceries and paying their light bills. Right? How do we realize a sustainable society when we're living in an environment like that? How do we realize a resilient society when there is a segment of our population that is only valued through their labor and consumption and not because of their humanity? How can we realize a sustainable and resilient society when we continue to embrace an economy that is built on extreme extraction? We have to work hard to not only create a cleaner society, but also a more just economy. So again, not only do we have to answer these questions, but we also have to understand the intersectional nature of our work, right? You can't talk about solar panels and energy efficiency without talking about people who are living in substandard housing where they have to heat their homes with stoves. You can't talk about this type of technology without also making sure that the people that have been left by our previous extractive economy are actually positioned to benefit from this new economy that we're working to realize through a clean energy future. If we're not intentional about that, then what will actually happen is what I call green capitalism. We're just replacing one extractive and exploitive economy with another. That's why the work is not just about how do we remove carbon from the air, right? Or how do we create these technologies that will save our planet? The people and the planet are one. You can't separate the struggles of the people from the struggles of our planet and be a serious person that is committed to resilience and sustainability. You cannot be focused on those two things without also being focused on healing and repair. Because if you're not, then I would submit to you, you're not a true environmentalist, because you're not willing to face the truth around how we got here. And there are many, many people that we are leaving behind around the world because we're not willing to hone that history of exploitation, structural inequity, white oppression, and all the other isms that continue to harm our humanity and our community. So it is your role and responsibility to reimagine what type of world we want to realize through this clean energy future. Is it a future for everyone, where everyone is valuable and significant? Or will we create a society where we have sacrifice zones, which we already have today, where individuals are being left behind as a result of the technology not being sensitive enough to the needs of the people, of all people? It's your responsibility to rewrite the narrative. It's even more so your responsibility to usher in what Dr. King called a values revolution. Why are values important? Why is a values revolution important? Because values are the thing that influence public decisions. Values, policy, is a reflection of the values of people in power. It's all public policy is. It's a reflection of the values of people in power. Now, I'm not expecting you to raise your hand or for the individuals on YouTube to raise their hands, but would you honestly say that the policies that we're experiencing today truly reflect our values? Wink, nod, you don't have to raise your hand. Well, if you agree with that, then what are you going to do about it? What are you going to do to ensure that your values are truly reflected in the policy? Not just the policy decisions, but how decisions are made, right? And a lot of that has to do with us working to ensure that we engage the communities that have been left behind. Remember, we may have all of our educational accoutrements and all of our degrees and our PhDs and MSs and all of those important things. But no one in this room can tell a black woman in Vine City who is trying to raise their child in a harmful environment and trying to figure out a way to make dollars stretch in ways that will support a family about resilience. There's nothing that you could tell them about resilience. It's also important to understand that we believe at the Partnership for Southern Equity that the people that are closest to the problems that we're trying to alleviate are actually closest to the solutions. We see them as a part, they have a role to play in reimagining the world that we want to see. So what are you doing to ensure that those communities are co-creating a world that sees them as valuable and a part of the change that we want to see in community? And when I say that, I'm not saying that it's your responsibility to save black people. It is not your responsibility to save anybody. You are not Superman or T'Challa or Superwoman or whatever. It is your responsibility to ensure that communities have the agency that is required for them to work with you to create the world that we want to see. What are you doing to ensure that that happens? Are you going into these communities, if you are engaging communities of color, with a mindset that is transactional or transformational? Are you entering into these communities with a spirit that is missionary in nature? Are you coming to a community as a missionary, hoping to save the souls of people who have lost their path? Or are you working to collaborate with them as liberators? That is a question that you have to ask yourself honestly. Are you coming to communities with an idea that you are pushing and a perspective and a value system that you are pushing? Or are you going into communities and listening to understand as opposed to focusing on responding? These are some of the questions that you have to answer. And so for me, it's about realizing a more sustainable planet that is also a more just planet, a more resilient planet and economy that is also focusing on repair, just as much as it is focused on resilience. It's about realizing a society where all people matter, and that everyone is precious and must play a part in this new economy that is emerging. It's about owning our history and not running from it or passing laws that are minimizing opportunities to teach it, because certain communities are too ashamed and cowards and are not willing to have real conversations about how we got here. So they would rather erase it than to talk about it. It not only harms communities of color, it hurts the white community as well when we move in that direction. So what is your role? What is your role in realizing the world, a new world, a values revolution? What is your role in moving beyond measuring your success based on your goals, but your ability to advance a mission? What is your mission? What is your personal mission? What is your organizational mission? What is your compass? Because that is what your values are basically as well, your compass. And my hope is that you will become a part of a movement that is not only focused on decarbonization or focused on new technologies, but also focused on healing this world and the people in it. That is your responsibility. So at the Partnership for Southern Equity, you've heard some of the work that we've had an opportunity to do to advance racial equity through the climate agenda. For us, we are a multi-issue organization. We not only focus on climate, but we also focus on health, economy, and growth. We also have a youth power building arm, as well as a social enterprise arm and a real estate portfolio, because we believe it's important for us to show up for our people in the way that oppression is showing up in their lives every day. People just don't have a utility problem on Monday and an education problem on Tuesday and a housing problem on Wednesday and a jobs problem on Thursday. They have those problems every day. So it's important for you to be intersectional in the way that you look at the work, and also work to engage uncommon allies. If you're in a room full of environmentalists, which I think we all are to a certain extent, but people who are just focused on your area of interest, then you're going to lose. You are going to lose. So how are you working to create spaces where common and uncommon allies can come together to advance this work? And so that is what we've tried our best to do, to be what we call relationship accelerators, because we believe that change does move at the speed of trust, right? And we do that through whether it be the Justice for the Accelerator, where we have stood up a national initiative, where we have supported over 150 organizations around the country through pre-development dollars and technical assistance and support. And as a result of that, we've been able to draw down from the federal government over $32 million for frontline organizations around the country, with over 80% success rate, to ensure that frontline communities have a chance to compete for the dollars. In addition to that, in terms of the delivery systems, the complementary delivery system that is working in conjunction with the Biden administration, we also did a story map on the history of racism and contracting and procurement in the federal government. Because we have to tell the truth and tell the story of how systems continue to perpetuate inequity. We also are working every day to build a new ecosystem of leaders in this space through our Just Energy Academy, where we train now over 500 people from around the country, leaders of color and other leaders in political positions and frontline leaders, to begin the process of advancing racial justice through the climate change agenda. We also are working to ensure that the solar industry is diverse, right? And so we're working with foundations like the NBA Foundation to develop workforce development programs for young men, young black men, on how they can engage in the solar industry. And once they go through our program, they get a national credential to ensure that they're able to compete for the solar jobs that are emerging. So for me, it is really about creating a new pathway forward. And it is also about making sure that we're not just changing public policy, but we're also changing people. And it is very important for us to understand that, because you can change policy all day long, but we've learned that if you don't change people, then eventually those people will come back and try to change your policies. And we've seen that a lot this year. So I'm going to stop there. I'm really appreciative that Southface has given me an opportunity to share. I appreciate all of your hard work, and even more so the hard work that you are advancing every day in your particular roles and positions. I believe that we all have an assignment. It's not just a job, but it's up to you to choose that assignment in whatever it is. And whatever assignment it is, please do all you can to make sure that you left the world better when you leave it than when you found it. And so I will stop there, and I just thank you again for the opportunity to share. So I think from my understanding, we have time for Q&A. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Hey, thanks. I have two questions. And as I understand it, they might not be able to hear me online
Yes.
because they don't have a mic, so if you could repeat my question.
Sure.
I'm curious, number one is going to be a loaded question. Do you think that there is a just capitalism? My second question is, in the work you do to work within the current system to imagine and create new systems, are there lines in the sand that you come to that you're not willing to cross
Mm-hmm.
to get to those?
Mm-hmm. So is,
If you could repeat
yep,
that.
yep, yep,
Thank
yep,
you so much.
yep, yep, yep. So the first question was, is there a such thing as just capitalism? And I would say that there is there is a continuum of how capitalism can show up in communities in ways that can either harm or help communities. Society. So when I always talk to people about, when I talk to people and they say that they're capitalists, right? This is not a capitalist society that we live in. Because if this was a truly capitalist society that we live in, I don't think we would like it too much, right? We wouldn't have Social Security. We wouldn't have child labor laws. We wouldn't have other things that are providing a space between supply and demand in ways that are not moral, right? And so what I would say is that there's an opportunity to move towards an economic system that does acknowledge the importance of competition, but at the same time does not allow extreme extraction and a thirst for profit, or a belief that in order for capitalism to be successful that you need a permanent underclass in order to support that level of capitalism. That we have to reimagine that, right? And it may not necessarily be called capitalism, right? But I think that there's an opportunity for us to be courageous enough to say, what are the faults of capitalism? What are the faults of socialism? What are the faults of communism? Because all three of them have issues, right? But but we can't do that unless people are willing to interrogate that and say, how can we say that capitalism is working when in the city of Atlanta, only 4% of poor children have a chance to rise out of poverty? Are you saying that it's their fault, right? And so that is usually what happens in a real conversation about that, is that we blame people for their circumstances when we never want to acknowledge how the system has been designed in ways that have created winners and losers. Case in point, there are not many people that know, and I know that one of the most loaded conversations that we've had recently at PSC, we talk about repair a lot, but there are also a whole segment of the community that is talking about reparations, right? How do we find ways to ensure that communities that have been harmed, specifically around stolen land and stolen labor, have a chance to catch up, right? And not just focus on you know, a dollar amount, but really about how do we repair these communities, right? Not restitution, right, but repair, right? And a lot of times people are like, well, you know, what would that look like? You know, how would we go about doing that? And have we done it before? And in particular in the South, people don't even understand or realize that after Reconstruction, slave masters were given reparations for their land that they lost as a result of the Civil War. So we have to have a serious conversation about what is our economy built on and how can we create a new economy. And I think that the same way that we get caught up, you know, in labels of Democrat, Republican, Libertarian, Green Party, I think that by continuing to get caught up in these labels of socialist, capitalist, or communist, we're not able to come together and create an economy that works for everyone. So I would say I think that a more just capitalist society is not the end, but a pathway towards something, right? A new economy that we don't understand yet, but I hope that one day we'll have an opportunity to get there. Dr. King called it the beloved community, right? I think that we have an opportunity to get there, but we just have to be courageous enough to do it.
Awesome.
Yep. And then there was another question that you had about a line that I won't cross as an organization. Is there a line that I would cross? I mean, of course, you know, it is not really important for me to work with organizations that are not trying to move down their equity journey, right? But I also believe that there are good people inside of bad institutions, and that we have to find ways to connect with those communities because you know, and that is why values revolution is so important, right? Because if you can connect with their values and align with that, then change can happen, hopefully both inside of institutions and outside of institutions. You know, also as an organization, we have a group of private sector entities that we work with around what we call the Just Business Roundtable, right? Where we have 30 corporations that are working with us to advance what we call a corporate racial equity agenda. Although, are all those companies perfect? No. But if you can show the organization that you're willing to move down this path in a legitimate way, then we're willing to work with you. For me, it's never been about the money. So there's no amount of money that could buy my integrity or character or the respect of the Partnership of Southern Equity. So there have been many occasions where we've turned down money. And I always tell my friends in the nonprofit sector, all money is not good money. So for me, there are lines, and I think that it really depends on the circumstance and the situation. But if it compromises my character and integrity and the integrity of the organization, I would not be involved in it if that partner cannot really show a measurable way that they're moving down this equity journey in a way that would benefit their constituents and the people. Yeah. Thank you. Any other questions? I was about to say, my goodness. You raised your hand first.
You mentioned policy changes and you mentioned some partisanship. Are there any policy ideas that have seen some bipartisan traction in the past 5 years that are starting to move from some of the things that would make our community a more just place, hopefully appeal to both sides of the aisle? Have you seen any bipartisan traction on anything you're excited about the past few years?
You know, I have been really encouraged by some of the traction that I've seen around transportation. and people beginning to understand that we won't build our way through roads out of the congestion and the bad air quality that we're experiencing. But the challenging part is that for some segments of the community, um, they are getting on board because of the opportunity for profit more so than, and that's fine. You can have your own motivation around certain things, but when the agenda is taken over by that commitment, then that is when we're in trouble. And I think on many occasions when we look at things like the creative class, right? You know, the Richard Florida conversation about the creative class, or even conversations around new urbanism, or conversations around sustainability or affordability. Those things, when people can find ways to make money from it, they're co-opted, right? And it takes away the opportunities that we have to really create a better society and a better community. So this conversation about transportation is something that I think I've been really excited about. I'll be honest with you, I think that I've been more excited about where the private sector has shown, how the private sector has shown up, in particular around conversations around racial equity and about, because again, their motivation may not necessarily be a moral motivation like mine. They are focused on having a competitive advantage, right? And they understand that there's a whole population that can help them have a competitive advantage, but they're not included in the economy. And so we have to find a way to move that forward, right? So, I think that the pragmatism of our times are creating an environment for things to emerge in ways that are exciting to me. Unfortunately, the bipartisanship that I think we're experiencing has very little to do with moving our humanity forward. It's really about winning. And it's really unfortunate to see that, because it should always boil down to the people. And I wish I had more examples of that bipartisanship. But I also think that has been by design as well. When you fund both ends of the extreme, right, it makes it difficult for people to come together. And so that is why it is important. Now, I have my own thoughts about centrists, so that's a whole nother conversation. But I do think that by funding both ends of the spectrum, you minimize an opportunity for people to come together. And so hopefully you all can play a role in helping to facilitate that bridge that we need. But hopefully I have a chance to see that. But I mean, those are kind of the two places that I've seen things that I've been encouraged by. Yes.
Yeah, thanks for being here. One thing that I say a lot is that phrase, like, don't let perfection be the enemy of progress.
Mm-hmm.
And I think about things like switching from coal to natural gas, which is progress in some sense, but obviously not perfect or inherently good. So I think about this new kind of wave of sustainability, and now we're ushering solar panels in, faster than ever before. But I also think about like how the lithium is sourced, and how material is made, and how it's going to be recycled or not. And so I'm just kind of wondering, how do you grapple with that phrase of not wanting to find a problem everywhere you look, because I don't think sustainability, or I don't know if it can ever achieve perfection.
Right.
But at the same time, making sure that you're taking, real good steps ahead instead of, two steps forward, one step back.
I appreciate that question. How the gentleman asked, with the challenges around sustainability and this transition, and I'm paraphrasing, how do we not allow the perfect to get in the way of the good as it relates to, continuing to work towards that clean energy future? Is that a fair way to articulate it? So I think the most important thing that we need to do is tell the truth, right? We have to tell the truth about the technology that is emerging, and it is not affordable for everybody, right? And so we haven't gotten to that point yet. So when we're greening houses and doing all the work in community, we also have to be honest that we may be helping to facilitate markets in those communities that will advance gentrification in those communities. We also have to be honest that, when we focus on green infrastructure and parks, that can also help to accelerate gentrification and push people out of communities, right? So I think the most important, that the amount of money that someone is making in a Ford Motor Company to develop a diesel engine or a gas engine, that they make more money than people that are making electric engines, right? So how do we manage that, right? So the most important thing is that, we have to tell the truth and understand that there are people, right, who are not necessarily benefiting now from the clean energy future. Of course, they will benefit by being able to live, right? But what is a life that does not provide opportunities for people to support their families? Living is not enough. It's about the quality of life and dignity, right? So how do we really import or insert the conversation around dignity in this conversation? And again, how do we insert this conversation around healing and repair in this conversation? And how are we courageous enough to, push back against some of the traditional environmental organizations that are not sensitive to some of the things that I've talked about, right? If we're going to be just as judgmental and rabid about our disappointment in the utilities, we need to be just as rabid and disappointed and courageous about some of the traditional environmental organizations that have exploited Black communities for the past 30 years, right? Because it does matter how we get there, right? So I think that is really important. And then also, how inclusive are we? As I said before, I believe that the people that are closest to the problems have to not only be a part of the solution, but are the makers or co-creators of the solution. So how are we being inclusive to ensure that there are diverse voices around the table that may have a different perspective about certain things? I think one of the real challenges that we face, God bless you, is groupthink, right? We have the same people around the table, and they're saying the same things, and it's not really moving us forward towards innovation at all. And then we get worried because we don't want to speak out because we want to continue to be invited to the chicken dinners. But the chicken dinners, I've eaten enough chicken. I don't need any more. I don't need to be invited to these events if it's not about real work. So we have to be more inclusive. We have to be more courageous. We have to be willing to tell the truth. We have to listen to the people who are suffering the most from this transition so we can make sure we don't leave them behind. And we can't be lazy, right? And what do I mean by that? Money is being invested in decarbonization that will just pull the carbon out of the air. I think that could be a part of it, but that is lazy because we got here through a history that has harmed a lot of people. And so for me, if you're not careful, the technology can actually move us towards not owning that past, right? So we just have to not be as lazy and be willing to finally, and that is why I'm always important about the conversations about a clean energy future, because I think it gives us an opportunity to not only hit the reset button in our economy, but it also allows us to hit the reset button in our society. And we have to be willing to leverage that opportunity, but there are going to be a lot of people that don't want to. So we got to fight for that. We got to fight for that because it's not going to happen by happenstance. We can't just assume that just because we create a sustainable world that it's going to be a just and inclusive world and fair world. It's not going to happen like that. So we've got to show up in a different way. So yeah, those are my thoughts about that. You're welcome. You're welcome. Any other questions? Yes.
I was curious about the story map that was created for social racism and whether or not the organization has seen substantial or just any impacts or influence from that in terms of people's values on the federal level.
Yes. One of the things that we've really appreciated by the Biden administration is its early commitment to racial equity. The first executive order that was signed by the Biden administration was a racial equity executive order, which required all of the various departments to develop a racial equity strategy, which is really important, right? The Justice 40 Accelerator Executive Order, which again has facilitated millions of dollars in the community. And there has also been a deep, deep commitment, and I don't have the numbers, of ensuring that communities of color, that the numbers of Black and women-owned businesses have increased in terms of the amount of opportunities for contracting with the federal government. And from my understanding, that number has increased a great deal from Biden's, from when Biden began. And a lot of that began with OMB's work, the Office of Management and Budget's kind of analysis of the federal government and understanding how racial injustice has influenced the federal government. You know, I think that we have to be honest in acknowledging the fact that the federal government has been racist, right, to Black people and communities of color, right? You know, whether it be the Eisenhower Act, whether it be the redlining, you know, in terms of the Home Mortgage Disclosure Act, you know, I mean, there's several examples, right, of how racism has perpetuated itself in the federal government. There's nothing wrong with acknowledging that, right? It's about how do we move forward. And I think that by utilizing data and research as a way to kind of tell the story of how it has affected communities, then we can get there. I mean, there is a reason why Atlanta is Atlanta, right? It is because Maynard Jackson required that 30% of all federal dollars go to Black businesses. That included the airport, right? Even though Black folks were the majority of Atlanta's population, he can only get 30%, right? So we have to, you know, begin to move that forward. And with that being said, going back to the story map, I would encourage y'all to go to justice40accelerator.org to check it out. It has influenced policymaking, in particular in DOE and EPA and DOT and some of the other areas that have leveraged it. And there are a lot of great people inside of the administration that are really trying to unwrap and unravel some of these deep, deep, deep structural issues. But with that being said, I think that we have an opportunity, and that is what the accelerator is to create complementary delivery systems, right, that can work in alignment with the existing delivery systems in ways that will encourage equity. You know, because if you don't have that, right, what happens is the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, ARA, right, where there was a commitment to investing in communities of color, and we saw that didn't happen. What you also get is the PPP, right, where you have these delivery systems. So it's not just about the policy or the outcome. Are the delivery systems inequitable, right? And how do we find ways to undo that, disrupt that, but also provide complementary support for delivery systems that have good intentions, but may realize negative outcomes for communities of color and other marginalized communities. Now, thank you. Yes.
I really liked what you said around making sure the people who are most affected by these things are central to it. What kind of tactics have you seen for organizing that have been most effective in like coming into a community without coming in as a missionary or coming in, as transactional?
So I think it's very important to acknowledge the history of a community. If you're entering into a community and don't know that community, then that is a red flag for anyone in that community, because all communities are not the same and all communities haven't been harmed the same, right? So you got to do your homework. That's the first and foremost thing. And then have to really be intentional about what are you offering those communities, and not just what are you willing to give, but what are you willing to give up in order for those communities to realize their agency and power. Because at the end of the day, it's about power dynamics when you're entering into a community. And sometimes that means helping and facilitating an education and training program for communities to have a full understanding of the challenges that they're facing. And we've done that, whether it be the East Point Leaders for Equity program that we've developed, our Development Watch Academy, where we're training an army of people to watch public finance and development patterns in the city in ways that will facilitate advocacy around development and public investments. All of the other training programs we have. So it's about agency cultivation, right? Because that is a gift that can continue to give for communities that have been marginalized and left behind. The other thing is you gotta break bread. You gotta spend money in communities and make sure that you're supporting people to engage in the issues that are important that we're facing. And then you also have to make sure that the community, and so we have our own style of organizing called value-based organizing, which is really about how do we make sure that that people's values are aligned before you're aligned in terms of your goals, right? And so are you focusing on values alignment when you're engaging in communities? And are you willing to ensure that you're working side by side with community stakeholders and with that developing clear objectives and outcomes? And sometimes they can be small, and you have to listen to the community. I remember one time I was doing some gun violence organizing in Vine City, and I was focused on gun violence, until the pastors in Vine City and English Avenue pulled me to the side and said, if you want the community to engage, these people need jobs, right? So for the next few years, we worked on a job strategy, which actually ended up lowering gun crime. So you gotta listen to the people. So those are some of the things that have just really been important and have made us successful in some of the organizing work we've done over the years, you know. But thank you for that question. Yes.
With all the efforts that you're doing through the partnership with Southern Equity and what's happening in our society, seeing the degradation of DE&I in Florida, Supreme Court systemically breaking down, getting rid of affirmative action, and they're on, they're appointed for life in essence. How do you, like, what are you doing, or what do you suggest that we do to keep going, or what type of parameters could we do that could circumvent some of the gains of the civil rights movement that has happened? Even here in Atlanta, venture capitalist firm getting sued by this man who's been working on this for 20 years, and he has the court to do it, to get rid of venture capitalists for Black women organizations. Like, that's the highest court in the land. Like, where do we
Right.
go?
Right.
Here?
Right. So there's always a bigger boss than the court, and you have to serve that bigger boss and understand that that bigger boss, and whatever you acknowledge it as, always leans towards the righteous. And so you have to believe that in the work that we do, and that those Supreme Court judges, even though we're in this moment of midnight, they will not live forever. And there will eventually become a time where we have an opportunity to influence that. And I think that is the challenge a lot of times, is that, and now I'm gonna be, not necessarily the opposition, the people that are anti-justice have 50-year strategies. The people that are for justice only focus 1 or 2 or 3 years at a time. So we have to change our whole mindset about what does winning look like, and have the toughness and the tolerance to go through what we need to go through in order for us to get to that destination, right? I mean, there was a time where we didn't have diversity, equity, and inclusion. There was a time where we didn't even have affirmative action. How did those people survive? They survived because they wouldn't give up, right? They survived because they knew that it was something. They were pushing for something that was bigger than them. And they were also willing to understand that they may not see the success that we're talking about, but somebody will if they kept fighting, right? So for me, it's about having a tolerance for the marathon and not having an attitude of a sprinter when it comes down to this type of work, because it has taken 50 years for us to get here after the creation of the Southern Strategy. This didn't just happen overnight, right? It's also about making sure that we're intentional about creating multiracial, um, how can I say, ecosystems of individuals that understand the value of advancing a more inclusive and just agenda, that we can't do it alone, that all people have to see their humanity in the struggles that communities of color are facing right now. And I think we have to create those bridges in order to encourage that. I think we also have to focus on systems and really understand how systems are working to reinforce the injustices that we're seeing. And the only way that we can really influence that is to have a longer view of our engagement around those. So we have to become systems thinkers, right? And understand how systems continue to perpetuate and reinforce the injustices that we're facing. But for me, you know, the way that I keep going is, like I said before, like, what was it that encouraged Harriet Tubman to continue to go back over and over and over again to bring slaves back from the South when she knew that if she was caught, she would be murdered, that she would be hung? Like, what was it that made Fannie Lou Hamer in Mississippi try to register to vote in an environment that her whole economic livelihood was taken away from her as a sharecropper, but that still didn't stop her from going to register to vote, right? These are the things, we have to get that courage back again, right? And I think that we have to, but the only way that we can do that is by reaching backwards and understanding those sacrifices. That is the reason why, when you talk about what's happening in our educational system, in particular in Florida, why some people don't want Black history to be communicated. Because here's the thing, it wasn't just Black people that were fighting against slavery. The abolitionists, John Brown and other people. That is the legacy that you all are not being taught, the history of the abolitionists. So it's always been a multiracial, you know, agenda. We've just allowed other people to make us believe that it was just a group of people, but it was way more complicated and way more diverse in terms of the struggle. So how do we bring that back? And how do we have more of a tolerance for these moments? And it's painful for us to come back to this. But that is why when King talked about a values revolution, I believe we focus too much on policy and not on the values that were perpetuating the policies that are harming us. And so we have to think differently about how we're engaging around this issue too. But you know, I really appreciate that question, though. Really appreciate that, and I hope I answered it. Yeah. So I know we got like 3 more minutes, 4 minutes. Any final questions? All right, well, thank you so much for allowing me to share. I hope you got full off of sandwiches, and hopefully I'll see you all again in the future, okay? Thank you. Thank you.
So just wanted to say thank you.
Oh,
Thank you for your inspiration. Thank you for your courage. Thank you for being with us today and sharing.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate it.
Appreciate you.